Dr. Vibe here, host and producer of the award-winning Dr. Vibe Show, home of epic conversations, the place for epic conversations. I'm the host, etc., etc. But tonight, we are doing one of the things I really enjoy doing, hosting M&M Explorers, which is produced by the Men and Masculinity team. And what we're doing is exploring important areas and having epic conversations about manhood and masculinity. One of the great friends of the M&M Explorers conversation is Robert Leung, and he's back with us tonight. Robert, how are you?
I'm very well. Thank you, Dr. Vibe, and I'm very glad to be here.
I am glad to have you here. How has 2020 treated you so far?
So far, so good. There's a lot of work still to be done, as I'm sure you are aware of, and I'm happy to be a part of it here with you tonight.
Well, it's interesting. People have New Year's resolutions. I don't have New Year's resolutions. I have a word for 2020, and my word for 2020 is complete. And one of the things I want to complete is complete relationships. And one of my goals, as I think I told you at the end of last year, is I wanted to have more conversations with you so I could complete my relationship with you, and hopefully you can complete a relationship with me. And I've probably been calling you too much already, but I hope you haven't got sick of me yet.
No, not at all. And my feeling is that hopefully our relation will never be complete. That it'll be continue to
True.
be an ongoing relationship and continue to grow and continue to learn from each other and continue to share our message with many the men out there.
Excellent. For our our continuing conversation, we've had a little bit of a conversation already on this topic, and do know that Robert and another gentleman, MJ Durkin, will be with us every month covering different conversation issues. But we wanted to kick off January 2020, start of a new decade, is what are men facing in the next decade, and what could a man accomplish in the next decade? And I know when I first brought this to Robert's attention, he had a very interesting response to it. Would you like to share your response to it, by the way?
Well, I think men are facing a lot of challenges. I think on a lot of levels, and I think a lot of them are the result of how of the perception of masculinity within our society, and a lot of it's quite negative, and that hasn't gotten any better with the political environment, and certainly our president has something to do with that as well. And that's a big topic. I mean, some of the things like toxic masculinity and deadbeat dad and Harvey Weinstein, Roger Ailes, Trump grabbing women. There's a lot going on that affects the society's perception of men in general. And I can't say that doesn't come on the heels of a poor perception over the last couple of decades as well. So I think men are facing an uphill battle in in just their public persona um, in the world today, and certainly in our country, I should say. But there are also other challenges that we're facing. Where we talked about resource scarcity in the world in general, and how that might result in more war and conflict in the world, which obviously more war would affect men going to war. The economy, falling housing prices, fluctuations in oil prices, the student debt crisis is going to be $1.5 trillion in the coming decade. The rise of artificial intelligence and automation, taking a loss of 40 million jobs in the United States, are projected over the next decade. So there are a lot of challenges facing men. But I believe that the greatest challenge is the perception of men um, not being not a fair perception of them. I think they're getting a lot of press. A lot of bad press. Some of it's deserved, but I think a lot of it isn't. And I think changing that perception is going to be a critical part of our work, certainly in the coming decade.
Great start as usual, and you're dropping knowledge bombs as always. So hopefully, I'll be able to cover as many you've dropped in our next few minutes. I just want to shout out people who are watching the conversation live. HW. We also have Jim, that's on the Get Vocal side, and Lee Rosen, program manager extraordinaire for the Men and Masculinity team. And Lee is managing the content on our YouTube and Facebook pages live, and he'll be relaying any information from there onto the Get Vocal platform so we can address it in real time. Robert, a number of things you dropped there, so let's get a start. And one of the things I want to ask you then is, with the challenge of men and perception, who are some of the either individuals or who's responsible for this not positive perception of men as we enter the new decade? Who do you feel is some of the cause agents instead of change agents, cause agents for that negative
Well, I
perception?
mentioned at the top of it the president for one, but there's also a political perspective that's the Pew Research that came out in 2017 that had a particularly interesting breakup where they polled Republican and Democrat representatives both in the House and the Senate, and it was an interesting perspective that the Republicans felt that women have no issues, or basically there's no problems and don't need to be addressed, and the Democrats were perspective was that there were a lot of women's issues that still needed to be addressed. So and it fell across party lines pretty much that way, where the Republicans are saying, men are don't need to change, and women's problems are solved, and Democrats are on the opposite side of that. So I thought that was an interesting perspective that I hadn't been so aware of before. That some of these issues between men and women are falling along party lines in a not entirely unexpected way.
Do you feel then, especially in the environment in the United States, and a big shout out also to Tom Mack, welcome as always, Tom,
Hey, John.
has have this has the subject of men become politicized in America, just like most things now in America become politicized?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's been like that for a long time, and it's continuing to grow in that direction. I think it's ways get worse. When politics comes in, I think humanity goes out a lot of times, and they just become an issue debate as opposed to a human debate. And I think that's part of the problem. I think it becomes a matter of name calling and labeling, and then we lose the humanity in the process. And I think that's what's happened. I mean, the idea of toxic masculinity is a horrible label to have put on men. I mean, it sort of covers a broad spectrum that says basically everything masculine is toxic. So I think that in itself is a really derogatory label to have placed on men in general. And I think that those perceptions hurt us more than anything else. Not that there isn't some truth to those things, but to make it to paint everyone with that a broad paintbrush, I don't think furthers a legitimate discussion of the issues.
It's interesting. I'm going to bring this in because I just watched the video recently, and I'll say it, and I'm sure everyone who's watching this or listening to this live on the replay, we do express condolences to the people that died in the helicopter crash
Absolutely.
on Sunday, Kobe Bryant, his eldest daughter, and the others. But what's really interesting, and it was on tonight, TNT did a 1 hour special with their TNT crew, um, Ernie Johnson. I'm going to, hopefully I remember Shaquille O'Neal, Charles Barkley, Kenny Smith,
Uh,
Dwayne Wade was on there also. And I would really mention, if people can, especially watch the Shaquille O'Neal. It was really, really like he, like I got to the point and say, I'm concerned for him
really.
because he said that recently in the last years, he's lost his grandparents. He's lost one of his sisters. And he is really, really crushed.
Really.
He's severely, like, he was tearing up big time to
Yeah.
the point where Ernie Johnson was patting him and saying, "Do you want to continue on?"
Wow. I
And it's really, it made me think, and I want to bring it up on this conversation, that one of the challenges men have is they can't be. It's harder for men to be human.
Yeah, I think that's, I mean, that's what I was leading up to too. I think that's part of the perception of men, and part of the perception that men feel they have to uphold on some level too. In order to be men, they have to not show their feelings and be tough, and and not be able to express their emotions. And I think that's part of the reason I think men die younger than women, because of that kind of repression that has, and I think we've talked about this before, that repression of your emotions has severe medical issues attached to that cause disease and stress and all kinds of complications as a result of repressing those important feelings that we have in our bodies. So I think, yeah, it's understandable that he might be going through some physical distress as well.
Just want to shout out also joining the conversation live on the Get Vocal platform, Aaron. And again, anyone who is live, especially on the Get Vocal platform, we have two spots open here. There's also the chat on the side. And again, Lee Rosen, program manager, Men and Masculinity, is manning our YouTube and Facebook pages. So if you have any comments, please put them on there, and Lee will share them with us. And again, there's spaces on here if you'd like to join us. I also wanted to, and you again dropped a myriad of things I want to share about. Uh, the dead men are being men as dads.
Right,
What are some challenges? Because you have a lot of uh, evaluated experience helping. Because I don't like the word coaching.
right,
I like to say helping men,
right.
and I know it's everything from men on their own to dads. What are some of the challenges you're hearing from dads entering the new decade?
Well, I think some of the challenges are the same as the challenges in the old decade, unfortunately. But I think, how do men create a realistic model for their sons and daughters to look at a man and appreciate who he is and respect him, and still at the same time feel that you're, as a man, representing what you want to be. That's a challenge. There are a lot of conflicting voices telling you how you should be and what being a man looks like, and there's a lot of criticism of men as well. So it's very difficult to navigate that in our culture right now. And I think it has been difficult for a while, but it's getting more and more difficult. I think as women have become more empowered, and rightly so, I think that's challenging. I think that makes parenting challenging in some ways. And the traditional aspects of what being a man are in terms of stoicism and strength and not demonstrating or expressing your feelings and emotions, I think those characteristics are coming under greater criticism. As I said at the top of our discussion, the perception of masculinity in general is this word toxic now. So that's a lot to try to dig yourself out from under. And the job of being a father, as difficult as it is, um, to add that on top of it really makes it seem like an impossible climb. It seems like you have to find a kind of perfection, and there's not a clear definition of what that should be. So it's very confusing, I think, from that.
uh, Respectfully, you've been helping men for many years, and one of the things that always catches me when we have these conversations live or offline is you have a concern that in some ways manhood or the ease of being a man is not got any easier. In fact, it's become more difficult. And why do you feel it's not progressing the way it could be or should be?
I think part of the issue is, that men find it difficult to express themselves. And I think there's a tendency for men to withdraw into their cave, as we say. And I think there is truth to that, into their own circles and into their own, into themselves. And that makes it even more difficult. I think there's an inhibition in men expressing and um, being aware even of their own emotions. And to have this kind of criticism and this kind of assault on a pretty regular basis in our culture, in our media, on what it means to be a man, and you should be this way, you should be that way, you shouldn't do this, that's wrong, look at what he did, they're all dangerous. there's a lot of negative messages out there, and not a lot of people standing up and saying this is the way it should be, and let's be more fair. Let's not bring all our problems down on men. They have their issues. There's no doubt about that. And I'm not trying to make an argument that says that they don't, but I don't think they're getting the kind of support and understanding that they need, and they don't ask for it, and that's part of the problem also. They're hard. Men are difficult to help.
One of the things that Robert and I talked on, actually, it was about 2 hours ago. I called him and said, Robert, I want to talk about this. And we had a little bit of a conversation. He gave his take on it. And I said, okay, I'll work with it. And the area, I was listening to something this morning about the whole area of competitiveness. And and I'm hosting this, so I'm going to put it out there. And Robert is here, so we're going to put it out there that men are used to being competitive.
Right.
And what I was sharing with Robert is, especially in this new decade, men not only are competing with themselves, with other men, but now women have become part of the environment.
Right.
And that's one of
The
the
competitive
things,
environment. Absolutely.
especially when it comes to the workplace. And that is challenging for a lot of men.
Right. No, I think it absolutely is. I mean, I think men know how to be competitive with each other, but I think that, and I'm not sure what is the right way to be competitive with a woman myself. I mean, I think you try to approach it honestly, but I think the tools that we have to compete with other men, I don't think that they quite apply in total when competing with women. So I think it is challenging, and there's not a lot of people out there saying, okay, here's how you do it. You know, I think you try to be polite and you try to be honest and straightforward. And even in that, those are not necessarily the ways you might be competitive with another guy. You know, you might not that you'd do anything dishonest, but you'd play a harder game, and I don't think that's appropriate with women. So I think it makes it much more difficult for men. You know, they feel challenged by that, and because they don't know what to do, I think that sometimes that can make them react in the wrong way. So yeah, it's a new situation. Women are empowered. They have, you know, equal opportunity in a lot of areas and competing with men, and in some ways exceeding men in a lot of jobs, which makes it even more challenging because now in some cases men are losing that competitive battle. So now that becomes a real challenge to your masculinity, and that's one of the problems we're facing. I don't think men have gotten a lot of help with getting answers, and I don't think men are good at taking help either in a lot of cases, because taking help makes you in some understandings of it that it makes you appear less masculine if you need help.
It's always challenging to me that if we as men know something isn't right, and it's almost like we're standing on a boat and it's sinking, and some of us would rather go down with the ship than saying,
Yeah,
if I wave my hands or flash a light, I'll get saved.
right. Yeah, no, I think that that's true. I think some of it is that stick to itiveness that can be admired in certain situations where you don't give up. You just stick with the job and get it done no matter what. That's a kind of commitment that we all admire. We say that's great. That guy doesn't give up. He's committed. But there are times when it's not about giving up. There's just a better way. And I think in some cases, the better way of having to ask for help is still not something that men are good at. They still see that as, you know, as a weakness. And so I think that that's part of the issue. And I think, you know, our society continues to reinforce that men should be that way, even though the dialogue has changed a lot with women in terms of what they want from men. I still think we haven't found a good enough way in general for men to navigate that change from what is considered more traditional masculinity, more stereotypical masculinity in terms of not showing emotion and stoicism and self-reliance and competitiveness. Um, they haven't found a way to navigate away from that into something that gives them more flexibility. And I think that's a process, an ongoing process, but it's complicated.
So why? And I'm looking at this here. The generation that you represent were and still are challenged by this. Are you still seeing some of these challenges that you experienced with the younger generation? Is there something different about them? Because it's also going to lead to another point I'm going to get to. But are you also seeing that in younger men?
Yeah, I absolutely do. I still see many of the same issues still. The ability to express emotion, the ability to be aware of your own emotions and be confident enough to express them and share them, and not and not turn inward, not isolate yourself. So I think that's a big one. I still think that exists. And I think men are still finding it challenging to navigate what it means to be a man in society and how should I act. How do I act with women? Women are much more have much more power and influence now than they've ever had before. They're more outspoken, and rightfully so. I don't begrudge them that at all. But I think it makes it really challenging for men to know how to interact with them, and that's an ongoing challenge. I don't think that's gotten a whole lot better, and I don't think the younger generation, is better at navigating that than my generation has been.
Okay, well, we have someone jumping in. Hello, Aaron. How are you?
Hello, Dr. Vibe.
Hi, how are you doing?
Do we have audio?
We have audio. We can't. We only can only see your.
Top of your
I guess
head,
your hat, top of your head. That's better.
little
You're
little better.
you're in darkness, but we can see the grays of your chinny chin chin.
There we go. That's a little better.
All right. Yeah. Well, I'm here. I just thought this was a very interesting conversation. I've been having some deep thoughts personally about the evolution of masculinity, human femininity, um, both men and women getting in touch with both their masculine and feminine, actualizing and facing the toxic of both areas and the what are they calling it, the ascended or the divine of the other
Right.
aspect. And I really dig it. I really dig what you're bringing up.
Well, thank you. What would you like to share? Because we value your opinion. We value for you taking the time to jump in. What are your thoughts? Like, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges for men going into a new decade?
Similar challenges of women when we're getting into such an evolved society and a technology that allows us to look at some of these health aspects of the emotional being as well as the physical, temporal, mental, business being. Um, because that's kind of one of my things is humanity in business, the
Mm,
people aspect. And some of my interests have to do with these types of topics as far as polarity, gender, because all humans have aspects of both feminine and masculine, and these societal roles which are trying to define the human, like Robert was saying, about it causing health issues.
Uh,
It's not healthy for the human being not to express the emotions or to even feel limited in
Absolutely.
expression, and
Yeah.
also female, um, and I've always kind of been in touch with my feminine as far as allowing myself to have emotions,
Right.
express emotions. And I do think it's very important. And I do think that coming up in the next decade, and as the evolution of technology and humanity with society and these social aspects become more comfortable in their own skin, realizing we're all just a human is really big. I know I kind of tie a lot of things together, but like in the business world, I really like the concept of a passion based economy, or even when you talk about competition versus collaboration,
Yeah.
Right.
and a lot of this Earth Gaia stuff, and how the Earth family really needs to step up their game when it comes to human nature, not just on a general gender specific role, but I think that that's a huge part that's causing a lot of conflict, not only among people in a gender, but among between genders.
Aaron, you mentioned something interesting. What is a passion-based economy?
Well, this is going to be way off topic, but
Oh, well,
I'm
I don't
kind
want
of
to do that.
I'm kind of a technologist, and
Okay.
so we talk about a cashless society or a free economy
Right.
or guaranteed income. Okay, so these artificial intelligences and robots are making our cars, are helping us make decisions, are doing our farming, are increasing our farming. So where a lot of the work, the jobs that we actually do are customer service oriented.
Okay.
And so when you're dealing with even technology, to put a price tag on invention and creativity, it changes the dynamic of the society. So when we're talking a passion based economy, we're talking you're getting paid and you're able to survive and work on your passion, and rather than being hemmed into one of these jobs, one of these roles. And like this ties into gender specifics and competition a lot, because the AI really and the robotics really makes it within the next 10 years a society where a human does not have to work to produce, to survive, to get
I,
the farm,
No, and
I
everything.
see what
So
you're saying. Yeah, I
they
get it.
print houses now,
Right.
out of bioavailable equipment. And
Right.
so um, I really think that the unity of the sexes is necessary to bring our society into
Yeah.
advance. Not a competition boy versus girl or competition within that gender specific role, but really learning how to work together and accept someone that doesn't fit in that
Yeah,
societally
I think that's what we're talking
role.
about too, is how do we come together in a way that is meaningful and be able to acknowledge each other, honestly and openly and respectfully.
I just want to jump in, and Aaron, I think that's a really great perspective, and it's like opening my mind a bit, especially how especially AI is going to change the whole status and environment of work, and how many like we're talking about men here, the effect that it's going to have on men,
Mm.
the less jobs they're going to have. Many men like to do things, and that privilege is going to be taken away from them.
If that happens, yeah. If that happens. I
You
don't
know,
know.
and
That's
and it
another of the challenges that men are facing, you know.
right. And I think it's a really good point you're bringing out that AI hasn't really hit yet, and when it hits, it's going to be interesting to see what men's reactions going to be. Like we have had over the last few years, more robotics, the assembly lines, but this is going to be a next level. Like probably by the end of this decade, many people aren't going to be driving their cars. Some they're going to be driven for them. If and We already have a lot of millennials that are not even owning cars, like young men that they're not even owning cars.
Yeah, you're
Yeah.
right, Dr. Bud. I think that's
Yeah,
another
my son gave
challenge.
his car up a year after he had it. He's like, no, it's easier to get a ride or Uber or take the bus, and
Right.
cheaper.
Yeah.
So then let me ask Aaron, let's take a look what as with your son, what do you see as his father, some of the challenges he's going to face in the next decade from your perspective?
Well, like we're talking about in the workplace, Everyone's feeling a little bit of pinch. I mean, in most major cities, minimum wage or even double minimum wage is not really enough to survive and support a family. You need a two income. As soon as those kids hit college, unless you're, you know, even four times the minimum wage, they're going to have to work to help put themselves through college. So these economic aspects really reward the money versus the human.
Mm.
You know, it kind of, there's not a lot of intimacy per se in the workplace.
That's interesting.
Robert, you want to add on to that? I was
Yeah,
going to share something,
I
but I
think
know
that's true, and I just thought it was interesting using the word. There's not a lot of intimacy in the workplace, and I think
I love that.
that's an interesting word to use. I just thought some of the humanity is being taken out of the workplace, essentially. I mean, literally, there are more machinery operating things, and that is going to affect a certain segment of the population, a huge segment of the population. It already has affected them, and men have largely been a bigger proportionate um, piece of that of our society that's been affected by that. The loss of automated jobs and the sending a lot of manufacturing overseas, and all of those things have already affected us. And so that continued evolution of automation and artificial intelligence is going to affect more and more industries. And what do we do with that population? I know that in some of the Scandinavian countries, they're doing some of what you're talking about, which is, giving people a salary just to live. If they don't have a job, they get a salary anyway. So I think it's part of that movement in that direction that you were talking about, Aaron. Yeah, I think that's a challenge that's
I, I,
hard
I,
to
wi-
fix.
I wish I had the opportunity to do a poll, and maybe this is something, an idea for our Men and Masculinity team to send out to all our followers, especially our men followers. Just asking a simple question: Are they, if they're in the workplace, are they passionate about what they do?
Yeah, that's a great question.
you know, are they, since we're talking about the whole workplace, are they passionate about what they do? I'd be very, very, very interested to see what the results are with that. Actually, Lee and I will talk about that offline. I think we should send out that poll because I think it'd be very, very interesting to give that reflection about, how do they feel about the passion that they do. Like, I'm passionate about what I do. I just wish I could have been in that space 25 years ago,
Right,
but at least I've found that, and I'm wondering how many men of all ages are they passionate, even if they're not working, are they passionate about life?
right. No, I think that's a great question. I really do. I think that speaks to whether life is meaningful to you and you're doing something that you feel that matters. You know, I think particularly since men are so identified with what we do for a living, like it literally becomes part of it is who we are. It's how we present ourselves. Well, what do you do? I'm a creative director. An engineer. Whatever it is, that's how you present yourself. When people ask you, what do you do? It's like saying, who are you? This is who I am. And that's still a part of our culture. So we definitely identify with what we do. Our jobs are who we are.
I'd like to say thank you for Paul for stopping by on the Get Vocal platform. Thanks very much. If you want to come in, there is a space, and also you're free to make comments on the side. I also want to take a look. I'm just taking a list of things, and we touch. I want to talk of the whole area, and I'll get this to Aaron first because Robin and I have talked about this before. Aaron, what do you feel about the? Is there a lack of resources for men to help become better men?
Um, Resources to become better. I I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't necessarily think there's a lack of resources to help. What I think there is a little bit of lack of social acceptability.
Can you expand on that?
Um, just kind of one of these gender things, a very specific things. And so, say for instance, you get a flat tire, you're driving your car. right?
Right.
And I'll call AAA. But back in the
Right.
day, before I had back problems, I would just fix it myself, and that was kind of a social norm. You know, if there's a guy and a girl in a car and there's a flat tire, the guy just gets out and fixes the tire.
Right.
So the woman, it wouldn't be a problem as far as social norm to hey, can you help me? You know, and so it's not that there's not resources. It's not that I can't call AAA. It's that men are kind of expected to be self-sufficient, I guess.
Right.
In you know, in the most simplest term, um, and it varies from culture to culture too. You know, with the patriarchal culture of America, it does differ quite a bit in matriarchal hierarchies. Um, at least from what I've seen. But at least in America, yeah, it's like men are supposed to be independent, and so is there's kind of just this like, you know, I've experienced it myself. I feel bad. I've even been ridiculed. Why are you asking for your help? You're a capable man. Deal with it.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
you know, been with that. So it's like, you know, um, where I've seen women ask for the exact same help and been like, oh yeah, we'll help you. Let's show you, and
Yeah.
you know, it's acceptable.
Yep.
So that's probably a simplified example and explanation.
It's very clear and understandable. And thanks for that. And we have another new friend joining us. Paul, how you doing?
Doing great. Doing great.
Hi,
Good.
Paul.
Hey, Rob.
Thanks for stopping by. Please add to some wonderful conversation that's going on.
Well, that question that Robert just posed about lack of resources. I mean, I'm in a men's group, and all of us talk about like where would our lives be if we weren't involved in a group, you know, of men with trusted relationships, you know, driving mutual accountability towards our goals. Like, you know, how would we be handling, you know, tough situations in our lives with our wives or our girlfriends, or going through divorce or trying not to get divorced. And you know, to men kind of striving to, you know, be the best they can be and handle things as best they can. I mean, it seems to me that there's an incredible lack of resource. I mean, when I describe what I have amongst my men to other men who don't, you know, they're blown away. And some show interest, some don't, but some just starts at least to get them thinking, Jesus, like what a resource. You know, how different would my life be if I had a group of men who had my back, and I could you know, run decisions by them before I make them. So no, I think there's an incredible resource if we define resource other men.
Robert, want to
I
jump
was
in?
going to ask Paul, what men's group are you part of, Paul? Did you do a men's weekend or?
Yeah, I did a Sterling Men's Weekend back in the day, but this is more of like a, you know, this isn't really an affiliated group. It's just men who've done different weekends, who have found each other, you know, state of Connecticut, and just come together every other.
Do you hear me?
Yep.
My microphone keeps popping off. I did a Sterling Men's Weekend back in '92, and
Nice.
so I've been involved. I've been on the men's team for over 30 years. So I know Sterling well, and you know, I think it was a great weekend for me, and it opened up a lot of possibilities and a lot of opportunities as well. But mostly an opportunity to know men at a different level and to have men in my life in a whole different way. And you know, it's
Yeah.
part of my journey to here is talking to men about their lives, and particularly about emotion and being able to express their emotions. And as a man, recognize that our emotions are an incredibly powerful, instinctive part of who we are, and we repress them to our own detriment, which was not a topic that actually went over that well in Sterling, at least in my chapter of Sterling. It was an uphill battle to get that conversation out there, but I want to welcome you as a Sterling brother. Then I'd acknowledge that.
Not to be here.
And I want to ask, and I think Robert, I know the answer with you and Paul, but and if there are people watching live, especially men, do you have what's the I'm looking for a word here. Do you have someone, if you have a good day or bad day, do you have a man that you can share that with?
Absolutely. I've got a number of men to share that with, and I have. I mean, I think that's one of the things we talk about, not isolating ourselves. And I think that's something men do, going into our cave. They talk about that, and I've certainly done that in my life prior to doing my men's weekend and becoming more involved in the workings of Sterling over time. And as I said, I've been on a men's team. I'm now on 3 different teams over the years to continue that conversation and continue to have the support of other men who understand what you're going through. And I didn't have that before in my life, and it was something that I prided myself on not needing anybody. I mean, that was what we were talking about before, this idea of stoicism and isolation, and you can do it yourself. And I think that that's an important part of masculinity. Don't get me wrong. I just think when we take it to the extreme where we don't need anybody, it hurts us.
Yeah,
You know,
it's
we,
like taking Aaron's example of the dynamic with a broken down tire, right? Like, I'm not going to ask for help.
right.
Or I'm not going to offer help to a man. It's like, it's applying that to like every aspect of your life.
Exactly.
Okay, so I just want to. I'll ask. Paul. I'm pretty sure that you have I was gonna say ride or die guy. That's what I was gonna say. A ride or die guy.
Yeah.
I'm sure you have that.
Yeah.
But I don't want to make assumptions.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. I have multiple.
Yeah.
I mean, these are men that I talk to, multiple times a week. And then if there's time goes by where we don't talk, doesn't matter. You pick up right where you were before.
Excellent. So then let me ask Paul, what was your life before you got involved in a men's group?
Yeah, I mean, I have brothers, which is phenomenal, but I look back at those conversations with my brothers, and it was a life of hiding, what the problems that I was facing or the challenges I was facing, to try to just help others, right?
Right.
Wanting to give as a strong man and put off this impression of, I've got my shit together. I'm here to be helpful, to my younger brother, or to just kind of chit chat, with my older brother, but never getting below the surface to understand, what are you up against, right? What are you dealing with? Never asking those deep questions and never divulging any of those deep answers. And I know I sponsored one of my brothers to go to the weekend, Robert, and he then sponsored my older brother. So
Nice.
amazingly,
That's right, 3 deep. Nice.
I know, right? Amazingly, my conversations with them now are just much deeper, much more quickly.
Yeah.
And any major decision that we're going through, we ask each other as if we're in a men's group together, even though we don't talk nearly as much as I talk to my men in my group.
That's a great brotherhood, literally. And I sponsored my brother into the weekend too, so it really deepened our relationship in a way that was like unimaginable before, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, we have, and I knew he was going to get here some way, somehow. Tom Mack, how you doing?
I'm on the tail end of the flu there, bud.
So, hey, Matt.
Oh, you're like many people. Well, I'm speaking that you're going to see the victory.
Yeah. Yeah, I was listening. I forgot your name down. Not
Paul.
the old man up top with the glasses.
Paul.
I don't know who you're talking about.
Yeah, you know who I'm talking about. I was listening to Paul, and some of my story, Doc, and geez, Robert, you know me like a book.
I've been here for a long time, man.
But I can remember when I was 15 years old, living in my own apartment. I was on my own, and I used to drink. When we were in school, you go to the school dances with the kids in middle school, and they were doing all the giddy drinking. They're going to the dance. I was the guy who never made it into the dance because I passed out in the woods. So I didn't have any kind of skills. And I didn't realize what a scared little boy I was. And I had no coping skills. And people would say, "How you doing?" "I'm great," and I'm the pain of feeling alone, uh, living in the woods, renting my own room, going to school, and then I got. Thank God I never had a drug problem. I feel so compassionate to the people that do, and mine was drinking. We were bootleggers, and I remember when I came to the end of my drinking, I was, I was 30 years old and I had the DTs. That's how much I drank. I just wanted to drink the pain away, and I can remember going to specific meetings. And I remember going into meetings, and after the meetings, people would hang out and laugh and do all this stuff. And they'd ask me how I'm doing. I'm like 5 days sober, and it's like, "I'm doing great," and then I would just wiggle out of the room, and I'd be walking up the stairs to leave the meeting, and everybody was still down there having a great time, just wishing I could be a part of it. But I didn't know how to ask for help, you know? And then I did the weekend when I was like 7 years sober. And it took a lot of years to grow up with the men. And, Robert was one of the men who helped pull some of those arrows out. And luckily, the freedom I have today because of it is just phenomenal, you know, especially, having 5 children and being a grandfather now. It's like I felt like I did my weekend 2 months ago and I forgot that I did it like 25 years ago.
Yeah.
And
Tell me about it.
yeah, I know, right? So, but
I think it's an interesting comment, Tom. And I think that, you talked about being 15 years old when a lot of this stuff happened to you, and and I think it's true for men, and it's certainly true for me too, that there is that 15-year-old locked inside of all of us.
Yeah.
That hasn't had a voice, hasn't been able to express himself, doesn't know how to be a man, still trying to put on a good face on that, doesn't have the support he needs, and the guy's 40 years old, but that 15-year-old is still running the show inside. And
Sure.
and I've had you and I have both had hundreds of conversations with men about that same issue. You see it come out around the fire, around the circle, when we inspect men, and everybody finally fesses up to that scared part of us that we've never let out in the open in front of anybody else.
Right.
But when we do, we're free. That's the first step in becoming free and stepping into manhood, is recognizing that kid inside of us still exists, and you got to take care of him.
Well, you know what? I'm going to just jump in. Like one of my mentors said to me recently that, isn't it interesting that more people can relate to you when you're failing or not successful than when you are successful?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'll get to the competitive part in a minute, but at the same time, when the time came to lead men, we would have these offsites. We'd have 250, 350 men there, Robert,
Yeah. Some nights 300.
And I would usually start off the day with all these men, and if I'm not going to, it's called lowering your mask. If I'm not going to,
take the mask off.
if I'm not going to be personal with the men and be very superficial, the weekend with that men is going to go absolutely nowhere. So
Right.
I used to take my own experiences of what I used to be afraid of. It took me 12 years of being on the men's team to let my men know something that happened to me as a kid.
Right.
And I found my freedom through that. It took 12 years, but I found my freedom through that. And then I spoke about it to 350 men. And you would be surprised, you would be shocked how many men came up to me for the rest of the weekend and said, "Can I have your number? Something happened to me and I'd like to talk about it." Because, like men are embarrassed, so many times are embarrassed. They're too embarrassed to say what has happened to them and would prefer, like myself, to stay down, and
Right.
stay into that, just the ego would not let me open myself up and ask for help.
Right.
So I've always become a champion and a fan for men. And, when it comes to competition, there's an old saying, there's two ways that men compete, with each other or against each other, right?
Right.
So I have to go out there every single day. I'm in a business which I have a lot of competition, and I have my context going out the door every day is I'm gonna go out and kick your ass.
Right.
It's
Yeah,
like
exactly. That's
because you're
nothing
gonna
wrong with
take
big competition.
because you're gonna take the food off of my table, and I'm not gonna let you. But I don't verbalize it. I just that's the competitive
Right.
nature of thousands of years of what's in my DNA.
Yeah.
And
I'm gonna interrupt you there, and I'm gonna get Paul to join back in just a second. I'm just gonna catch up on some comments here. Lee Rosen is saying, yes, I do. It's important in my life to check in and not bring my work day home. And also, Aaron is saying the inner child is very important.
Absolutely, Aaron.
So, Paul, these two giant powerhouses could go on forever. So, but I want to make sure that you get a chance to put your money into. So, what would you anything you'd like to add on from what's been said over the last few minutes?
Well, I think what Tom's bringing up is something that is always brought up around a fire. You just don't know which man, is going to start to uncover what's been going on with them for years. And sometimes it takes years for men to be comfortable enough with themselves or with the men to start talking about the stuff that's buried deep down. I mean, Tom, you're talking about the scared little boy. I mean, it makes me think of a man who was on my team last year who, only 3 years of being on the team, started to share unbelievably important facets of his life. And all of us were blown away by not having known that any of that stuff. So you can know a man without really knowing a man, even after years.
Absolutely.
And and I remember in that moment thinking, given that I sponsored this man into the weekend, like, holy shit, how much more impactful could my relationship with this man have been had I known these things earlier about the man? But then also, in all humility, saying, it just takes time.
Yeah.
You can't force things to. You can't force healing to happen faster than it needs to happen.
No.
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
and hearing you talk, Tom, about the number of years, right, that things have taken in your journey. Sometimes it just some makes me sad that we don't have men early on to help us get to where we want to end up more quickly.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of this realization of just goes back to what I was saying earlier about resources, right? Like where would I be now if I had these men in my life that I have now 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago? I mean, shit, sky's the limit, right?
Yeah.
And that realization, starts off with like, what a shame, but then energy to want to enroll other men. So I think it's a negative and a positive.
Well, it's. I'm just gonna jump in, and I'm probably the rookie in years in regards to working with men. But two of the things I really acknowledge when it comes to men, accepting them where they're at,
Right.
and also a relationship is always best if it's an investment, not an expense.
Those are two good terms.
yeah, my I don't know if it's a gift or a curse, but at times.
Well, if you're saying it, I know what it is.
Well, I'll give you a perfect example. It's I've been through enough in my life to where I can actually I can physically feel men's pain.
Mm,
I'll give you a perfect example. Uh, Robert's brother, who I loved dearly, when he passed away.
wow.
Um, My brother was 47 when he died, and the void is unspeakable. It's not it's one thing to lose your parents, but to lose a brother, it's physical. I could feel it physically. I was, I almost even drank over it, and I've been sober for 33, 4 years, whatever. But
Right.
to actually, when Robert's brother passed, I could feel that pain. I know that pain. It's like pain is pain, right? So I've always had that ability to empathize with men and see through and feel and be compassionate. And I think that's actually helped men in some, in many ways, like, the ability to feel that. I was trained at a very early age to feel things because I could actually gauge. Uh, I put my hand on the doorknob when I was a little boy to open the door, and I could tell just by if I was going to put my hand on that doorknob, I could tell if I was going to either get my ass beat or get killed that day. So I can actually feel tension in a room. I can read a room really well. I can read people fairly well. So to always try to extend myself to somebody and try to put myself in their shoes and not be combative with them, and let them rant. Just let them get it over with and rant and have their ego and all that other bullshit. That's okay.
Well, I think you're talking. Go ahead, Dr. Vibe.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Robert, I want to express my condolences. I did not know that.
Oh, that's
So
okay. Thank you, Dr.
I want to
Vibe.
express.
I appreciate that.
And also, too, there's a comment here on the side. I learned that I have to approach men who need help with an abundance mindset. If I approach them with a scarcity mindset, I get resentment. For example, if I'm giving them my time, but my mindset is that my time is scarce. What do you gentlemen think about that comment?
I think basically you're just speaking to, coming to a man with the truth and not with a preconceived notion or anything else on your mind, but the man that you're talking to. That's what I get from that.
I get what you had said earlier about making an investment, not an expense in the man, right? If you approach a man and say, I'm here to pour everything I can and not necessarily get out a certain return, then you're going to have a lot more success than if you're, trying to take a man like a horse to water and then pissed off when he doesn't drink.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Tom?
I just wanted to get back to that competitive part a little bit. Is that okay?
Yeah, come on back. No problem.
Because competing against men is fun. That's why we have basketball teams and all this other stuff. And I got to go out to work and compete against men. But when you compete with men on a team, it's so valuable. You find a common purpose together. Strive to win, working together, problem solving, doing whatever it takes. It's more fun to do it together than to do it alone.
Absolutely.
In a lot of ways. And, that's the turnaround in my life. It's a slow turnaround, but, and with women have come such a long way, even with the Me Too movement and what's going on today with women, which is, I feel like is a very positive thing. But I think men really misunderstand women in many ways. And here's one of the simple ways. And I make a joke out of it, but it's true. A lot of men, when women wear these fancy shoes and beautiful pants and all that, men think that women are trying to impress them. It's like nothing could be further from the truth. Women are more competitive than men with women.
Yes.
They're showing other women that my shoes are better than your shoes. They're not
exactly.
They're not trying to impress me. So it's like,
that you know what? So Tom, you've given me another conversation topic, saying I'm gonna ask on one of these M&M Explorers, men, do you understand women?
No. The right answer to that on every occasion is no.
Robert, you were going to say something. Sorry for interrupting.
No, I was just going to say that, competition is one of the things we talk about, but the value of men seems to me is it's a fraternity, and it has aspects of fathering in it. It has aspects of brotherhood, obviously, in it too, and the opportunity to discover things that we may not have discovered when we were young in our own life. Heading out, Matt. And that's the power of it to me. Plus, you have a ready-made reference point in your life that's solid, and you'll hear different opinions. They may not always be accurate, but they're always honest and they're true in that sense. And I think that's how many people have that in their life. Forget about men or women. How many people have a group of people in their life that they can trust implicitly, that are there for them? Not many of us. Even that doesn't even exist in families. A lot
True.
of times. That kind of truth where you can go to somebody and say, you know what, I've got a confession to make. This happened. And know that you're going to be received compassionately, honestly. You may not hear what you want to hear every time, but nobody's going to toss you out on your ear. They're there for you. And I think that solidarity is such a valuable thing to have in your life. People who've been part of fraternities and other groups and have experienced that and know that to be true, but a lot of us haven't. And I didn't know that before I was on a men's team. So there's a lot in there that to heal you moving forward. So I recommend that to every man.
It's interesting you're saying that, Robert, and I'm going to give two examples of that in the last week. So there's a gentleman who's like is my ride and or die guy, one of them.
Right.
And we had a conversation, and he said, you know what? He said, and he gave it to me straight. He said, look, you have got to focus on taking care of yourself. And he was being straight. He says, like this is, and it hit me.
Right.
It hit me. We've known each other for a long time. Our families are very close. And I had to, after the conversation, I had to spend time in a quiet space and really have that message sink in, because I know it was coming from a place of love.
Right.
Because he knows, he's my ride or die guy. And we'll get to something else offshoot of that in a second. That's one example. And then this afternoon, and I was sharing with Robert, I have a great opportunity to do some sharing for the Indigenous community in Northern Canada coming up in the next week. And it's being the government's Northwest Territories government is sponsoring it, this, that, and they all of a sudden say, well, what is your fee? And I had no idea what to put out there. But so the funny thing is, I called a gentleman who's not immediately close, but we're in a sort of a circle. We keep in touch. And he said, well, you know what? Start with this amount and see what they can do. So I called back the individual. I said, okay, this is what I'm looking for. They said, no problem.
That's great.
So relationships are the key for, I think, in anything. And I'm not going to keep Robert too much longer, but I do want to get what are some suggestions you would give to men out there to help them accomplish what they need to or what they would like to in the next decade? And I'll also chime in on this, but I want to have your input in first.
Well, certainly the first thing that comes to mind is get a men's team. Get a group of men around you that are committed to each other and committed to your success and will support you both compassionately and with ruthless compassion, which is a phrase that we use in the men's work, which means telling a man what he has to hear, the way he has to hear it, regardless of his feelings. And I think that's really essential. Not somebody who's just going to pat you on the back and encourage you to do good work, but who's going to hold you accountable. Who's going to have you commit to things, who's going to follow up on you, and you do the same for them. And that's been critical to me in moving my life forward and being successful, is having men that I'm accountable to, that brothers that I've committed to. And when that time comes up, they're calling me. And if it's not done, there's going to be a consequence. And I'm probably not going to like that consequence, so I'm going to get that thing done. And I learned the hard way. There's a lot of consequences I had to do. But it's invaluable having that accountability in your life until you can become more accountable for yourself. And even then, it's a valuable tool to help you grow. So I would say get a group of men in your life. Join the men's team, do the men's weekend.
Yeah. I'll add now, just to put it out there, folks, I haven't done a men's weekend. So, and I'm still alive, but I have a feeling
Well,
that
you have
Robert's.
plenty of men in your life too, Dr. Vibe.
Yeah, there you go. But I must say that my life has leveled up being associated with gentlemen like Robert who have done men's weekends. So I haven't got there yet, but they have leveled up my life. So I will back what he said because they've leveled up my life. I have 2 or 3 things I would put it out there for men in regards to helping them what they want to accomplish in the next decade. I feel that it's very important that every man out there has 2 or 3 other men that know everything good about you and everything bad about you.
Yep, I think you're talking about the same thing. You know,
Right?
a men's team, a team of men, are going to hold you accountable.
And those men are going to have times where they're going to say things to help you, not to like you.
Right. Absolutely.
So I circle back to the example I had last Friday with one of my close male friends. It hurt initially, but I needed to hear that.
Right.
I needed to hear that.
I hear you.
The other thing I would say is if you have men that you are close with, I do this as much as I possibly can with at least 3 or 4 men. Call them once a week.
Right.
And the first thing you want to ask them is, how's your world?
Right.
And even if it's a voice message or a text message, how's your world? It's different than how you doing.
Right.
How's your world? We're so used to saying, how you doing? How's your world? Meaning that you're caring about their whole, their macro, not their micro.
Right.
How's your world?
The other thing I would suggest saying, something we say in the men's work, is be willing to say what no one else will say.
True.
Be willing to ask the question that no one else will ask. And that to me has become an example of truly caring about someone, because it's not always, how you doing? Everything okay? Great. See you around. It's like digging in there and asking those questions and wanting to hear what no one else will ask and no one else will listen to. And those are the game changers, and they're tough, and sometimes they're uncomfortable, sometimes they hurt, sometimes they make you angry, and that's what has to happen. And someone who really cares is willing to tough that out with you.
And I would just, as Robert and I are going back and forth here, like ping pong symmetry here. Another thing that's been helpful for me is, and I had it in my mind and I forgot, so I'm going to pick up something else, that men just investment, get into relationships that are an investment. And if you do invest financially, you know that investments accrue over a long period of time.
Right.
So if you're going to be committed to a man and his well-being, it's a long-term journey. It's not a short-term journey.
Yeah, I think the idea of long-term friendship is, I don't know how popular that is in
Exactly
masculinity anymore. Having a group of good friends that you trust. I don't know how much that is considered a necessity anymore. But the other thing I would say is do a men's weekend. I did the Sterling Men's Weekend, which is what Tom Mack did and what Paul did. And there are a number of men's weekends, so it doesn't have to be that one. I recommend that one, but there are a number of different men's organizations that put on men's weekends to get a perception of what it means to be a man. It used to be that we were raised by elders in groups with our fathers, and we taken and learned to work side by side with them. We no longer raise our kids that way. So where do you go to get that masculine input, that masculine sensibility, that sense of who you are as a man among men? Where do you go to get that? You don't get it in school. You might get it on a sports team. There are other ways to get at it, but men's teams really work at those issues. And I think it's really a critical part of your masculine experience to, as a man, have that experience. So I would highly recommend that.
And
Excuse me.
I'm just gonna okay. And here's a question here from Anthony Davis saying, Robert, do you think that men in general are losing the ability to connect with each other because of forms of social media, etc., etc.? We did discuss that earlier on, but Robert, you if you want to address that now, if you can.
Sure, Anthony. That's a great question. I don't think that they're losing the ability to connect because of those things. I think that they've not had the ability to connect, and those things have filled the gap in between. And I don't think men have been as interested in trying to connect with each other. But I think those things certainly make it easier to distract yourself. So, and men are good at distracting themselves. So, but I don't think those are the cause. I just think they make it easier.
And Aaron is saying here, I do think all humans are influenced by media in all forms.
I totally agree with you, Aaron. I think media is a powerful influence on us. Between the news media, television, movies, the stereotypes that they create for men and women are powerful brainwashing in a lot of cases. And that's why it's important to have people in our lives that we trust, that we work with on an intimate level, so that we get our own perspective in real life, real time, not online and not through our phone and not through our iPad or a computer. Real experience with other people to know who we are and to know who other people are as well, and to build those instincts in us so that we know when we go out in the world how to interact with people and how to read them. And we have that our instincts are sharp. We're animals. Human beings are animals at our base, higher developed animals, but we still have animal instincts. And it's important to hone those instincts. And one of those is to be able to identify who people are, a friend or foe, and how to trust people. And those instincts you can't develop online. You can't.
I'm going to close out with two more things before we leave, because these ideas, Robert is used to me now. Things just percolate from
Keep it
conversation.
rolling, Dr. Rod.
One of the things I'm going to challenge men who are watching this live on the replay in the next decade, I want you to share your story with another man.
Mm. All right.
And doesn't matter, that man could be that could be a young boy, it could be an 80-year-old gentleman. I want you to share your story with another man. And if you've done that already, get other men to share their story with you. Someone you don't know or hasn't, or maybe someone that you've known. Create that environment, create that trust, create that heart that someone will share, a man will share his story with you.
And I would just add to that, if you do that, join us on the show and tell us about it.
Absolutely. Would really like to hear that. And then the last thing, Robert actually shared an article with me a few days ago. This is why Robert is here. This is why I am here. This is why MJ Durkin is here. This is why Lee Rosen is driving the ship from the Men of Masculinity team and all of this. The reason why we're doing this, one of the reasons, I will quote you this. And this is from a recent survey from the American Psychiatric Association. Quote, men commit 90% of the homicides in the United States and represent 77% of the homicide victims. They're in the demographic group most at risk of being victimized by violent crime. They are 3.5 times more likely than women to die by suicide, and their life expectancy is 4.9 years shorter than women's. Boys are far more likely to be diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder than girls, and they face harsher punishments in school, especially boys of color. That is what we will close with. Robert, if people want to get in touch with you, how can they do that?
You can reach me at homcoaching@gmail.com. And you can also reach me on Facebook, Robert Leung, Leung.
Before I give my contact information, Aaron says heavy stats. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Very heavy.
Before I close out, I'd like to thank everyone who helped us make this an epic conversation. We had Jim, we had Lee, Tom Mack as always, Roden, thank you so much. Anthony, Aaron, thank you so much for helping making this an epic conversation. My name is Dr. Vibe. I am part of the Men and Masculinity team, host and producer of Eminem Explores. Please follow us on the Get Vocal platform. Follow Men and Masculinity on Twitter. We have our next epic conversation, happening on Thursday night when MJ Durkin will get into this conversation. What are men facing in the next decade? What can a man accomplish in the next decade? And he has emailed out a bunch of challenges to a large group of men. So make sure you're back Thursday evening, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. If you want to find out more information about Men and Masculinity, go to menandmasculinity.com. I always close out my conversations. Live your life as a dream. If you can dream it, you can make it. Sometimes you have to get smaller to get stronger. Block assumptions. And finally, aim bigger, aim better, aim higher, aim wider. Thank you very much for watching the conversation live on the replay, and look forward to seeing you on Thursday evening, January 30th. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
At 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Sorry about that.